The day of the charity event started like any other in the small community center. People moved in and out of the hall, carrying chairs, setting tables, testing microphones, and arranging the decorations. There was a warm energy in the air, the kind that comes before an important evening. Everyone wanted the event to be perfect, because it was their way of supporting the people in their town who needed help. Among the busy footsteps and constant voices, the doors of the hall opened slowly. A quiet hush passed through a few volunteers when they noticed a frail-looking nun stepping inside. She walked gently, almost as if every step was carefully measured. Her hands were small and thin, her face calm, and her simple smile made her look even softer. She didn't draw attention on purpose, but her presence made people stop for a moment. She looked around the hall with peaceful eyes, taking in the lights, the stage, the piano placed neatly in one corner, and the people moving from side to side. Some of the volunteers greeted her politely, and she responded with a gentle nod, the kind that made people feel as if she truly appreciated even the smallest gesture, but not everyone understood why she was there. A few young helpers whispered to each other. They wondered if the nun had come by mistake or simply wanted a place to sit and rest. They assumed she was too old and too weak to be part of any performance. The event was supposed to run on a tight schedule, filled with energetic dances, strong vocal performances, and skilled musicians. To them, she didn't look like someone who would fit into that planned at the front of the hall. The event director was checking equipment and giving instructions. He was tired, stressed, and trying to make sure every detail went right. When he noticed the nun standing quietly near the entrance, he walked over to her with a polite smile. He asked if she needed help finding a seat or if someone had invited her to watch the event. The nun simply replied that she was hoping to play one piece on the piano that evening. Her voice was soft, but there was sincerity in it. She said it as calmly as someone asking for a glass of water. The director paused for a moment, unsure of what to say. He had nothing against her, but she looked fragile, like someone who might struggle even to lift the piano cover. He didn't want to embarrass her in front of the crowd or put her in a difficult situation. The schedule was already tight, and adding an unexpected performance made him even more nervous. He tried to be gentle when he told her that the list of performers was full and the rehearsals were already underway. He suggested kindly that maybe she should enjoy the evening from the audience seats. His words were soft, but the message was clear. He didn't think she could actually perform. The nun didn't argue. She didn't show even a hint of disappointment. She simply smiled, as if she had heard such doubts many times before. She looked at the piano across the hall, but she didn't push the issue. She thanked him quietly and walked to a chair near the corner of the room, while the rehearsals continued. The nun sat with her hands folded calmly in her lap. She watched the children practicing their dance, the young singer working on her notes, and the local band trying to get their instruments in tune. She didn't interrupt anyone, didn't ask anyone for attention. She just waited, but the whispers did not stop. A few performers glanced at her and whispered again among themselves. Some said she was probably bored and wanted to sit near the piano just because it looked peaceful. Others said maybe she used to play long ago but couldn't anymore. One person even said there was no way she could keep up with the younger performers who had been practicing for weeks. The director, meanwhile, kept looking in her direction every few minutes. Something about her calmness made him feel strangely guilty. She wasn't demanding anything, yet he felt he had pushed her away too quickly. But he also couldn't risk the evening's flow. His mind kept jumping between responsibility and doubt. As the noise filled the hall, the nun remained still, listening to each sound as if it were part of a long, beautiful story. She watched the piano again and again, her eyes gentle, almost nostalgic, like someone remembering something important. After some time, she slowly stood up and walked toward the instrument. She didn't touch it, didn't even lift the cover. She simply stood there for a moment, looking at it with a quiet fondness, the kind that only comes from years of knowing something deeply. A volunteer noticed her and hurried to fetch the director, worried that she might try to play during rehearsal without permission. The director joined them and approached the nun once more. She turned to look at him, her smile unchanged. She asked again, in a soft voice, if she could play a small piece, just a short one. Not to disturb the event, not to take someone else's time, but simply because she felt moved to share something. The director hesitated. He didn't want to embarrass her or create a scene, but there was something in her tone that made it difficult to say no. She wasn't insisting. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She looked hopeful but calm, as if she would accept whatever answer he gave. He finally sighed and told her she could play a short piece, very short, just to see how it fit with the event's flow. His voice still carried doubt, but he tried to hide it behind a polite expression. The volunteers standing nearby exchanged more looks. Unsure whether this decision was wise, the nun thanked him with genuine warmth, then slowly moved toward the piano. The hall, which had been filled with chatter a moment ago, grew quieter. At first, people didn't even realize they were watching her. But then, one by one, eyes turned toward the corner where she was now placing her fragile hands on the piano. Her fingers hovered above the keys, thin and delicate, almost too light to press anything. The director stood a few feet away, nervous and unsure of what would happen. Some performers crossed their arms, expecting a moment that would feel awkward. A few others whispered again, thinking she might only manage a few soft, shaky notes, but the nun wasn't thinking about them. She closed her eyes for a moment, took a gentle breath, and let her fingers rest on the cool keys as if greeting an old friend. Her touch was soft, respectful, almost loving. The hall went completely silent. Not out of respect, but out of curiosity. Most people were sure she wouldn't be able to play more than a simple tune. Others thought she might make a mistake and stop quickly. But everyone watched, waiting to see what this frail, quiet nun was about to do. In that stillness, the stage lights reflected faintly off the piano surface, making the scene look almost magical. Even though nothing had happened yet, something in the air felt different, as if the room was holding its breath, and this was the moment where everything began to change. The hall was so quiet that even the soft buzzing of the ceiling lights felt loud. Everyone waited, watching the frail nun with curious eyes. The director stood close enough to step in if something went wrong, but he held back, unsure of what to expect. He wanted to be polite, but deep down, he still believed she might struggle to play even a few notes. The nun kept her eyes closed for a moment, as if she was listening to something only she could hear. Then she opened them slowly and looked at the keys again. Her hands hovered gently, but she didn't press anything yet. It was clear that she wasn't nervous or unsure. She just wanted to begin at the right moment. A few volunteers whispered quietly behind her. They didn't mean to be rude, but their surprise was obvious. Some thought the director had made a mistake by allowing her to play. Others assumed she probably wouldn't perform well, but at least she would get to try. No one expected anything remarkable. That was simply the truth. The nun finally touched a single key, just one. It made a soft sound, simple and warm, and a few people leaned forward without even realizing it. But before she played the next note, she lifted her hands again and turned toward the director. She asked, in a very gentle voice, if she could begin again from the start. She wanted a second to gather her thoughts, not because she was unsure, but because she wanted the moment to be right. Her tone was calm and polite, as if she didn't want to inconvenience anyone. The director nodded quickly. He didn't understand why she needed to start over, but he didn't want to seem unkind. He stepped back and told the volunteers to give her space. She breathed in deeply, then placed her fingers back on the keys, but she didn't start yet. Instead, she turned her head toward the director one more time and asked something no one expected. She asked if she could play a piece that was slightly longer, not too long, but longer than what he had in mind. The director blinked, surprised. He had already taken a risk by allowing her to play at all. The schedule was tight. There were performers waiting, and every minute mattered. Adding more time to her performance felt impossible. He opened his mouth to speak, prepared to gently refuse, but when he looked at her face, he paused. There was something in her expression, a calm courage, a quiet strength that made him hesitate. She wasn't demanding anything. Her eyes were soft and patient, but in them he saw something he couldn't explain. It wasn't pride or stubbornness. It was something pure, like the simple wish to share something important. Even then, He couldn't fully understand it. He sighed softly, rubbed his forehead, and finally nodded. He told her she could play a slightly longer piece, but only if she promised it wouldn't disturb the flow of the event. She smiled with such warmth that he felt a sudden, strange sense of relief. As if he had made the right choice without knowing why, the volunteers exchanged surprised looks. Some whispered again, wondering why the director agreed. A few teenagers at the back rolled their eyes, thinking this was going to drag on too long. But there was nothing they could do now. The moment belonged to her. The nun lifted her hands again, but before playing she spoke one more time. She said she wanted to dedicate the performance to everyone in the hall, not to impress them, but to offer them peace. Her voice was steady, soft, and full of sincerity. Her words weren't rehearsed, yet they touched something gentle inside the room. Even those who doubted her felt a small shift in their hearts. Then she began. The very first note was not loud, but it carried a depth that surprised everyone. It wasn't shaky or weak. It was steady, full, and warm like the opening of a story. And the next note followed smoothly, and then another, forming a small melody that felt alive. The director's eyes widened slightly. He didn't expect that. Her fingers moved slowly at first, with the kind of care someone uses when touching something precious. Each note flowed into the next, forming a gentle pattern that filled the room with calmness. There was something old and familiar about the melody, yet it felt new at the same time. Like a memory coming back to life, people stopped what they were doing. Some had been putting up stage lights, others were adjusting microphones, and a few were arranging chairs. But now they stood still, facing the piano. As she continued, her fingers grew more confident. The melody deepened, becoming richer, fuller, more emotional. It was as if her hands remembered something her body no longer showed: strength, experience, years of practice, and a connection with music that never faded. She didn't look at the audience. She didn't look at the director. She didn't even look at her hands. She simply let the music guide her. Like someone walking along a path. They've walked thousands of times, but still cherish every step. A few performers who had doubted her began to lean in, listening with unexpected respect. The young dancers paused their stretching. The local band members put down their instruments. Even the sound technician lowered the volume on the speakers. Wanting to hear her more clearly, the room felt different now, warmer. Softer, almost sacred. The director stepped closer, his earlier stress fading for a moment. He had spent the whole morning worrying about small details: timing, microphones, stage cues, but none of those concerns mattered now. The music filled the hall in a way he hadn't expected. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't flashy. But it touched something deep, something simple and human. The nun's expression was peaceful. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't trying to prove the whispers wrong. She was simply sharing something she loved deeply. Something she had carried in her heart for many years. As the melody grew more emotional, a few people in the hall felt their eyes fill with tears, not because the music was sad, but because it made them feel something pure and honest. It reminded them of things they had forgotten: quiet evenings at home, moments of kindness, memories of loved ones, or simply the feeling of being understood without words. One of the teenagers who had rolled his eyes earlier now stood with his mouth slightly open, unable to believe what he was hearing. Another volunteer, who had doubted her strength, wiped the corner of her eye, embarrassed but unable to stop herself. Even the children who had been practicing their dance stopped whispering and listened in silence. They didn't fully understand the complexity of the music, but they understood the emotion behind it. It felt safe, warm, and full of gentle meaning. The nun continued playing as if she had all the time in the world. Her hands moved effortlessly now, floating over the keys like soft birds gliding across a quiet sky. The music rose, then softened, then rose again, almost like a conversation between her heart and the instrument. And then something happened that no one expected. The director, who had doubted her the most, felt a strange pull in his chest. He realized with a hint of shame that he had judged her too quickly. He had seen only her age and her fragile appearance. He had assumed she was too weak to contribute, too slow to keep up, Too old to matter in a room full of younger talent, but the music proved him wrong in the gentlest, most beautiful way. He found himself stepping even closer, mesmerized by the depth of her playing. It felt like every note carried a lifetime of patience and quiet strength. He wondered who she had been before she became a nun. Had she played in halls like this? Had she taught children? Had she used music to comfort others? He suddenly realized that he didn't know anything about her. Yet her music spoke to everyone in the room more clearly than words ever could. The melody soon reached a part that felt almost like a conversation with heaven, soft, calm, full of something pure and comforting. No one in the hall moved. No one spoke. No one dared interrupt what she was creating. Her frail appearance no longer mattered. Her soft voice no longer mattered. What mattered was the truth unfolding in front of them. She was not weak. She was not incapable. She was not someone to be dismissed. She was a woman with a gift she had carried quietly, hidden from the world until this very moment, and the best part was that she still wasn't done. The melody was only beginning to reveal the depth of what she held inside. The music continued to flow from the nun's fingers as if it had been waiting for years to be heard again. Every note she played seemed to open a new door inside the hall, filling it with warmth and meaning. The people who had doubted her earlier now stood completely still, almost afraid that any movement might break the moment. The soft melody rose like a gentle wave, then fell again, carrying the room with it. As the music deepened, something began to change in the atmosphere. The hall no longer felt like a busy place with decorations and equipment scattered around. It felt like a quiet space where everyone shared a single feeling, even if they didn't know how to describe it. The nun didn't move her body much, yet her playing carried so much emotion that it felt as if she was telling a story without saying a word. The director, who stood closest to the piano, felt the change most strongly. His earlier doubts slowly melted into quiet respect. He watched her hands, amazed by the strength hidden inside them. They looked fragile, yet they moved with such confidence and purpose that he felt a little ashamed of the assumptions he had made before. The melody suddenly shifted, becoming brighter and more lively. A few children in the room gasped softly. They had not expected the gentle old nun to create something so full of energy. Her fingers danced across the keys, moving faster now, yet still smooth and controlled. It was like watching someone paint a beautiful picture, but instead of colors, she used sound. A few adults exchanged surprised glances. One of the volunteers whispered to another that she must have practiced for years to play like that. The whisper wasn't meant to reach her, but she smiled faintly as if she had heard anyway. It wasn't a proud smile, it was more like someone remembering. A long journey full of quiet moments. The music then softened again, becoming tender and emotional. People who had been listening with interest slowly felt their hearts grow heavy in the most peaceful way. The melody carried something deep, something that reminded them of moments they had forgotten or feelings they had ignored for too long. Some thought of their childhood. Some thought of their parents. Some simply felt a strange comfort, like someone was quietly telling them, "You're safe. Breathe." A middle-aged woman standing near the back of the hall wiped her eyes before anyone could notice. She didn't understand why the music touched her so deeply, but she knew it came from a place of love and care. One of the teenagers who had been impatient earlier now stood with his arms relaxed, his expression soft. The music had done what words never could. The nun herself seemed lost inside the melody. She wasn't performing for applause or recognition. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply sharing something that had lived in her heart for many years. Her face remained calm, but her hands spoke with a strength and honesty that no one expected. The director took a small step forward, almost without thinking. It was as if the music drew him closer. He felt he needed to be near it, to understand it more. He watched the nun's face, the peaceful expression, the light in her eyes, the focus in her posture. It made him wonder about her past. Who had taught her to play? How long had she practiced? Why had she stayed so quiet all this time? The melody reached a new section, brighter and more hopeful. The notes lifted gently, like sunlight breaking through clouds after a long night. People inhaled softly, moved by the sudden lightness in the tune. It felt like a promise, like someone whispering that better days were always possible. No matter how heavy life felt, a group of young performers sat down on the floor without realizing it. Their rehearsal had been forgotten completely. They didn't want to move. They didn't want to miss a single moment. The nuns playing felt too pure, too rare to interrupt. Even the sound technician, who usually only cared about cables and volume levels, stood quietly with his hands in his pockets, his eyes fixed on the piano. He had heard many musicians play in that hall before, but none of them had ever touched him the way this Frail Nun's music did. The piano keys glimmered faintly under the stage lights. The nun's thin fingers moved across them with perfect ease. The audience could tell that this was not the playing of someone who had practiced casually. This was the playing of someone who had lived with music, who understood it deeply, who carried it inside her as naturally as breathing. The melody shifted again soft, then strong, then soft again, like a conversation between the heart and the world. At times, the music felt like a memory. At other times, it felt like a prayer. Everyone felt it differently, yet everyone was moved. A few volunteers who had doubted her earlier now felt a quiet embarrassment. They had looked at her fragile appearance and assumed she would struggle. Now they realized how wrong they had been. They realized that strength doesn't always show on the surface. Sometimes it lives quietly inside someone, waiting for the right moment to be seen. The nun continued playing, her posture unchanged, her expression calm. But her hands told an entire story. They spoke of patience, kindness, loss, hope, and the gentle strength that grows only through years of quiet perseverance. Someone watching her closely could feel that she had lived a life filled with moments that shaped her far more deeply than anyone realized as the melody grew more emotional. The director felt something unexpected. He felt humbled. He had spent the entire morning trying to control every detail of the event, believing he knew what was best. But now, standing just a few steps away from the piano, he understood that he had misjudged someone without giving her a chance, and it wasn't just him. The whole room had quietly underestimated her, but the nun didn't seem bothered by it. She wasn't playing to prove them wrong. She wasn't playing to make anyone feel guilty. She was simply sharing something beautiful, something she believed belonged to everyone. No matter how they had judged her earlier, the melody entered a powerful section, rising with emotion so strong that a few people had to take a deep breath. Her hands moved faster now, but not with force. Every movement was controlled, graceful, and full of intention. It was as if she carried a world of stories inside her and let them flow through her fingers. The large hall, once filled with noise and busy movement, now felt like a sacred space. It didn't matter who stood where, who had talent, who had doubts, or who had been confident earlier. In that moment, everyone was united by a single feeling, wonder. Even the children, who usually struggled to sit still, were captivated. Their eyes were wide, their mouths slightly open. They had never heard a piano sound like this. They didn't know how to describe it, but they knew it was special. The nun's playing softened again, becoming gentle and slow. The notes seemed to land softly in the air, like feathers drifting down. The room felt peaceful, almost holy. Some people closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. Others watched her hands, trying to understand how someone so frail could create something so powerful. Then, almost like a sigh, the melody deepened and grew heavier, carrying a quiet sadness. It wasn't a painful sadness. It was the kind that comes from remembering something or someone dear. The kind that makes the heart feel heavy yet full at the same time. A man standing near the stage felt a sudden lump in his throat. He couldn't explain it, but the melody reminded him of a moment from his childhood, something he hadn't thought about in years. It felt like the nun's music had opened a door inside him. He didn't know it was still there, and then the melody began to rise again, slowly lifting from that quiet sadness into something hopeful once more. It was like watching someone stand up after a long, heavy moment and choose to keep moving forward. The music soothed the room, wrapping everyone in a warm embrace. The director felt his eyes burn slightly. He blinked quickly, hoping no one saw. He wasn't someone who cried easily. But the music touched a place in him he didn't often visit. The nun's hands slowed down as she moved toward the final section. But every note still carried depth and meaning. She looked peaceful, almost glowing in the soft light. It felt like time wasn't moving. It felt like the whole room had been lifted into a gentler world where only the music mattered. And as the last notes drifted through the hall, everyone felt the same quiet truth rise inside them. This frail nun had not just played a song, she had opened her heart, and she had changed the room forever. When the final note left the piano, it floated in the air longer than anyone expected, as if it didn't want to disappear. The hall was silent, deeply silent, the kind of silence that comes only after something truly special. For a moment, it felt as if time had stopped inside the room. People didn't breathe. No one moved. Even the nun herself stayed still, her fingers resting lightly on the keys as if she was listening to the echo of the last sound. Then little by little, the silence broke not with noise, but with emotion. A few people took a small breath, like someone waking from a dream. Some looked at each other with wide, shining eyes, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. Others simply placed a hand over their chest, feeling the warm heaviness that the music had left inside them. And then, without planning it or thinking about it, the applause began. It started softly, just one pair of hands clapping. Then another. Then two more. And soon the entire hall burst into applause so loud and full that the walls seemed to tremble. People clapped not out of politeness, but with real joy, real gratitude. Some clapped slowly and gently. Others clapped hard, unable to stop themselves. The nun looked surprised for the first time that day. Her peaceful expression turned into a soft blush. She smiled shyly, as if she didn't understand why everyone was reacting this way. She wasn't used to attention, and she had never played to impress. But the applause reached her like a warm embrace. The director stepped forward, not rushing, but with gentle steps. He looked emotional, almost overwhelmed. When he reached the piano, he didn't speak right away. He simply stood there, unable to find the right words. The nun looked up at him, her eyes soft and humble, waiting patiently. Finally, his voice came out, shaky, but sincere. He said he was sorry. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a simple apology filled with honesty. He told her that he had misjudged her. He admitted he had doubted her ability and her strength. And he thanked her, truly thanked her, for proving him wrong in the most beautiful way. The nun shook her head gently, her smile calm. She told him there was nothing to apologize for. She said that sometimes people forget what others carry inside them because life moves too fast. Her voice was peaceful, without even a hint of hurt. Her forgiveness felt natural, like it came from someone who understood human weakness deeply and didn't hold it against anyone. By now, almost everyone in the hall had gathered around the piano. Some stood close, others kept a respectful distance, but all were drawn to her like quiet stars circling a warm sun. The young performers who had whispered about her earlier now looked at her with admiration. The children stared at her with wonder. Even the volunteers who had rolled their eyes before now felt a warmth in their hearts. One of the performers asked softly where she had learned to play like that. The nun looked down for a moment, as if she was searching through old memories. Then she answered in her quiet voice. She said she had learned to play many years ago, long before she joined the convent. She used to play for children who had no one to comfort them. Music had been her way of giving them peace. Some of them had cried when scared, some had felt lonely, and some had simply needed someone to sit beside them. Her piano had been her way of reaching their hearts. Her story touched the crowd more deeply than they expected. Some people lowered their eyes, imagining the quiet rooms where she must have played for little ones who needed comfort. Her music suddenly made even more sense. It wasn't just skill. It was care, patience, and compassion woven into every note. The director asked her softly why she never shared her gift with the community before. She smiled again, almost shyly. She explained that she didn't play to be seen. She played when someone needed comfort, when someone's heart was tired, or when silence felt too heavy. She didn't think a stage or a crowd was the right place until that day. When she felt something inside her telling her to play, her words made the room even quieter. But in a warm way, like a soft blanket wrapped around everyone, the applause began again. But this time slower, softer, more heartfelt. The nun gave a small bow, the kind you see from someone who has spent a lifetime being gentle. She looked around the room, her eyes shining slightly with emotion she wasn't trying to hide, slowly. People began to approach her one by one. A young girl stepped forward, her voice quivering, and said the music reminded her of her late grandmother. She said she felt like someone had hugged her through the song. The nun held her hand and simply listened, her expression full of compassion. An older man came next. He admitted he hadn't felt peaceful in a long time, but the music had brought something back into his heart. The nun nodded softly, telling him she hoped it brought him comfort. A teenage boy, who earlier had been impatient and uninterested, stood silently near the piano. When the nun looked at him, he struggled to speak. He finally said the music made him think of his mother, who lived away from home due to work. He missed her, but he didn't know how to talk about it. The nun reached out and patted his arm gently. That simple gesture made him exhale deeply, releasing emotions he had kept hidden. One by one, people shared their feelings. And the nun listened to each person with the same quiet care, never interrupting, never rushing them. It was as if the performance had opened a space inside the hall where everyone felt safe enough to speak from the heart. The director returned again, this time with a softer expression than anyone had ever seen on him. He asked if the nun would consider performing at the actual event later that evening. He said the audience needed to hear her. He promised nothing would pressure her, no lights, no expectations, no fancy introduction. Just a simple seat, a simple moment, and her music. The nun thought for a moment. She looked at the piano, then at the people around her. She didn't answer immediately. She wasn't the type to rush. She placed a gentle hand on the piano surface, feeling its warmth. Then she nodded. She said she would play one piece that evening, not as a performance, but as a gift. The director's relief was visible. He thanked her again, with a sincerity that showed he truly meant every word. For once, he wasn't thinking about schedules or microphones. He was thinking about the people in the hall and how much they needed, what the nun had given them. The rest of the afternoon passed differently than the morning. The hall didn't feel filled with stress anymore. There was a calm energy in the air, the kind that comes after something meaningful. The rehearsals continued, but people moved with softer voices and kinder expressions. The children practiced with smiles instead of nervousness. The volunteers worked with more patience. Even the sound technician adjusted cables with a lighter mood. Every once in a while, someone glanced at the nun, who now sat in a corner of the hall, hands folded gently, eyes closed as if she was praying or simply resting. She didn't look for attention. She didn't look proud. She simply looked peaceful. When evening arrived, the event hall filled with guests. Families, neighbors, friends, and people from different parts of the town came to support the charity program. The director welcomed them with new confidence, but this time his voice carried warmth instead of stress. The performances began: dances, songs, speeches. The crowd enjoyed them, cheering for everyone. But there was a quiet anticipation in the air, something unspoken that spread from person to person. Even those who didn't know about the nun felt something different in the atmosphere. Finally, near the end of the event, the director stepped forward and spoke about someone special who wished to share a quiet piece of music. He did not give details. He didn't announce her name loudly. He simply invited her onto the stage the way someone invites the sun to rise gently. With respect. The nun walked slowly to the piano. The audience turned their heads, curious. Some wondered if she was part of the program. Others wondered if she would play. But no one expected what would happen next. She sat, closed her eyes, took a breath, and placed her hands on the keys. And when she began to play, the entire room melted into silence. The same magic that had filled the hall earlier now spread even deeper, reaching hearts that had never heard her before. Tears appeared in the eyes of strangers. Hands tightened around loved ones. Some people leaned forward, unable to look away. When she finished, the hall burst into applause even louder than before. Not one person remained seated. People stood up, clapping, cheering. some even laughing with joy because they couldn't hold the emotion inside. The nun stood, bowed gently, and walked off the stage with the same quiet grace she had carried all day. Later that night, when the event ended and people returned home, everyone took something with them, a memory, a feeling, a lesson. And the lesson was simple, clear, and unforgettable. Never underestimate the quiet ones. Never judge someone by how they look, because inside, even the frailest hands may live a strength the whole world needs to hear.